All right, this is the story of my recent chess battle against Ozymandias, 82. This is I won this game. This is my highest level win that I've had yet. And what was really awesome about this game was that it was a come from behind victory. I was losing and hung in there and won. And the decision to hang in there is one that I've been trying to make in more and more games because one of the things it seems to be true for me at least, that chess doesn't really have a lot of, the chess games that I'm in don't have a lot of back and forth. Whoever gains the early advantage tends to just, that advantage just seems to grow as time goes on. Or they manage to just trade. They get a one piece advantage and then they just trade pieces all the way down to nothing until they've got one piece and you have none. Or usually it's I'm the one who's got the one piece, but there's not a lot of back and forth, and so if you're down, it can be easy to just resign. So I've been trying to commit myself to the idea of like don't ever resign, play down to the last move no matter what, because you never know what could happen. Maybe they'll mess up. Who knows? And in this game, my opponent messed up. So I'm going to go through every single one of these moves. This is like interesting for me to do. So I don't know if it's interesting for anyone to watch, but I'm just going to go through every single one of these moves. So I started with king pawn up because I've been trying to do a lot of king pawn ups and like really get used to it and try all the different variations. He does that, which is pretty standard. I do this, which is standard. At this point, I'm going for what they call the Italian opening, which means move the king's pawn, move the horse, move the bishop, and then immediately castle. Whether or not you can do all those things will depend on what they do in response, but those are sort of the immediate goals. And the horse that I move, you'll notice also the horse is attacking his king's pawn. So what a normal player would do now is they would move a piece to protect the black pawn. But he doesn't do that. He does this. So immediately out of the gate, this is kind of an unusual game because that was an unusual move. And the thing that's unusual about it is that pawn is now vulnerable. My horse can just take it. So I was pretty confused by that. I didn't know if he had some trick up his sleeve or what he was doing. I did just take it. And then he does this. Now that was another sneaky move. It looks like it's almost like the Scholar's Mate type setup. Obviously, he's not going to get a Scholar's Mate on me, but the thing that he is going to get is now my pawn is vulnerable to his queen. And I tried to see if there was any way to protect that pawn, and if there is a way, I couldn't think of it. So I do this, and that basically blocks the Scholar's Mate, and it attacks his bishop. There's nothing really for the queen can't do anything to the king, but now the queen does that. So he gets that pawn. So I could not figure out how to protect that pawn. And then my response to that is this, which pretty much ends whatever his offensive is, because now his bishop is in danger. His queen is not in danger, but his queen's not endangering any of my pieces either because everything is protected. So at this point, it seems like kind of an even game. He does that. And I do this. Now, I'm actually not sure at this point why I didn't just capture that bishop. If I had captured the bishop, then he would be able to capture my horse. His horse could capture my horse. So I guess I didn't want to make that trade yet. So instead I do this. But that was actually a bad move on my part. I actually thought that I had this guy in a checkmate situation. Because I thought that if I moved my queen all the way up and take that pawn, that because my horse is also protecting that spot, that would basically be a checkmate. But of course it wouldn't be, because the king could just slide over to the left one. But I wasn't thinking. I was too dumb. For some reason, I thought that if the queen is touching the king, and if the spot that the queen's on is protected, then it's a checkmate. But that's not always the case. I think the queen has to be right next to the king, not to the corner of the king. But I didn't mind making this move because I figured, well, if he does want to trade queens, that would be okay. And he does trade queens. So there we go. Now, finally, he moves his bishop out of the way. So at this point, still even game. I feel like I'm doing better because I have more pieces that are attacking spots in the center than he does. And I come up with that knight, and he comes up with this knight. So now we have 4 knights, all targeting the center of the board. Here's where things start to get really interesting. Because the queens are gone, on each side of the board, my side and his, the rook and the king are ripe for what's called a fork by the horse. If the knight can get on the spot that's basically right in front of where the bishops start, then the knight will be attacking both the king and the rook at the same time. The player will be forced to move the king, and so the horse will be able to capture the rook. And we're both ripe for that situation, but of course, I only see that I can do it to him. I don't see that he can do it to me. So my next move, my horse is 2 moves away from getting that fork. So I make the first move, which is there. Now, if I move, you can see that my knight now is just 1 more move away from being on the spot that will fork his rook and his king. So I make that move. He makes that move, which initially I interpret that move to basically be trying to block what I'm trying to do. Because if I move there and fork the king and rook, he can use his knight to just capture me, and that plan is thwarted. So now I thought, okay, what I need to do is I need to move his horse. The horse that he just moved into place, I need to force that horse to move. But what I'm blind to at this moment is the fact that that horse can move and capture my bishop. I don't really remember if I was completely blind to that, or if I just thought, well, it doesn't matter, because if he captures my bishop, I'll capture back with my pawn. But either way, this is where things start to go bad for me. So I move the pawn up to try to force his horse off of that square. He captures the bishop. Now, this was where I made a blunder. I was so excited about the fork that I did it. But what I should have done was capture that horse to win my material back, right? He took the bishop. I need to take the horse to get even. But I was too excited about the fork. So I went ahead and did the fork. So here's what happens. He moves his king like he has to. I capture his rook like I have to. And now I'm excited because even though he got a bishop, I got a rook, so now I'm winning. You see, I'm up 3 on him. But remember, little did I know, little was I paying attention to the fact that I was prone to be forked, same as him. And now he does it to me. So now I have to move my king. He captures my rook. And now he's winning. Now I figure, okay, I have to get his horse back. I have to get that horse that just took the rook. So I move my bishop into place. I'm trying to cut off any escapes for that black horse that's in the corner. He goes down there. He's threatening that bishop. I move up there with my king, which is now, with that move did 2 things. Number 1, it's protecting the bishop, and it also opened up a line for my rook to capture the horse, which is what I'm going to try to do on the next move if I can. He escapes, so I can't capture him with the rook, but I can capture him with the bishop, which is what I do, and then he captures back. So he's still up, but I should be able to get his horse with my king on the next move, but I get preoccupied trying to put together another fork. I do this. I move my horse into position to try to fork him again on the other side, which I can do if he doesn't play a move to protect himself. Now, I mean, this is the kind of move where I kind of felt like I had to make it, even though I assumed he would probably protect himself, but just in case he didn't. But he does. It would have been the third fork of the game, so of course he notices. He moves his rook. So now I take the horse. So at this point, I'm actually winning. I'm up by 1 pawn. We both have equal number of pieces captured, and I'm up by 1 pawn. But it's not going to last long because the problem is my horse in the corner is not as safe as I think it is. I think that horse is totally safe. It's actually not safe at all. And he just has to make that one move for it to become clear to me that I'm not safe either. Because my horse cannot move to... It only has 2 available squares that it can move to, and if it moves to either one, it's going to get captured. And I can't just stay there either because his bishop... All his bishop has to do now is move 1 square to be aimed right at me, and then I'm dead. At that point, I either have to move to one of those squares where I'll get captured, or I can just stay there and his bishop will take me. So I realized that my horse was dead, and so I thought, well, if I'm going to die, I want to at least take a pawn with me. So I do this, capture the pawn, he takes that. So now I feel like with that capture, we were sort of entering maybe even what you might call the end game. I don't know if this is the middle game or the end game. Definitely we're past the opening. We might even be in the end game here because of the way I sort of modify my tactics. Even though it says I'm only down by 1, that's because I have a few more pawns than he has, but he has 1 more piece than I do. And not only that, but he has 2 bishops, which, as I've been learning both from experience and book reading, like 2 bishops together, it's one of those stronger than the sum is greater than each part individually. Like when you have both bishops, it's very powerful what they can do together because of the way they cover all squares. When you only have 1 bishop, it's not half as powerful as having 2 bishops because of the way it can only cover 1 square. So he's got 2 bishops against my horse. Like his lead here is stronger than it looks. And I know that. So the thing that I decided to do is basically to go into like a turtle mode. I'm going to try to take a defensive posture and just protect every single one of my pieces and pawns. I'm going to try to protect everything and just kind of force him to try to make something happen rather than me try to make something happen. And so the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to try to create 2 pawn chains, one on the left and one on the right, and a pawn chain is just a big diagonal of pawns. Big diagonal of pawns is good protection because if you attack one, you get captured. So that's my first move to try to create diagonals. He does that, so now my rook is threatened. But I can do that, which blocks the threat of my rook and also continues with my pawn chain plan. He does that, which threatens my horse, so now I have to move the horse. I move him there. He does that, which threatens that pawn. But I do that, so now I have my complete pawn chain. So that was my goal, completed on that side. He decides that he's just going to, I guess, suicide up one of his pawns in order to break my pawn chain. So he moves into place. I moved my horse down there, to protect the pawn. But I was later told that was a blunder, that what I should have done was move this. I'm going to back up. What I should have done was move this horse up to try to attack his bishop. And that's absolutely right. That is what I should have done. But I was too dumb to do that. Attack the bishop on the left. This horse could have moved up and attacked that bishop on the left, but I was too dumb to do that, so I did this instead. So he captures. I capture back. Now I have kind of a broken pawn chain with a horse in the middle. He does that. And now is when I think, yeah, now I bring the rook out to protect that. So I'm still trying to just, protect everything. Don't let him capture anything. He does that. Okay. Oh, right. So now I move my horse there. Now, why did I do that? Because when he brought his rook over, I could imagine his rook coming down, all the way down, checking my king, forcing me to move my king, and then he could just slide to the right and he could take one or both of those pawns. Those pawns that are near the bottom. I should use proper chess terminology. They're on the second file, or maybe it's the second rank. The second rank, I think. He could just come back, and that rook could come back and attack both of the pawns that are on the second rank. So, in order to stop him from doing that, I moved the horse here, which is actually a pretty good move, because my horse is still protecting the pawn up there, but is also now blocking that rook from coming down and wreaking havoc. That was a pretty good move. He does that. I think he did that because he didn't have anything else to do. All my stuff was protected. He didn't know what to do. So then I moved that up. Again, I'm trying to make pawn chains, and it's also starting to dawn on me now that my 2 pawns on the far left side are basically what they call pass pawns, which means they can go all the way up without running into any other pawns. They are clear of all other pawns. That's not to say it'll be easy to get them up, but they theoretically can move up. So I'm going to try to do that. And I'm going to try to use my rook and my king to support those 2 pawns and try to move them up, because I'm thinking if I don't turn a pass pawn into a queen, I pretty much can't win this game, and it's just a matter of time until he grinds me down. So he does that, I guess, attacking that pawn. Well, I'm not really sure what he's doing there. He's just decided to go there. He's not actually threatening anybody in that position. So I do that to keep working on my chains, keep making my chains. He goes back up. I think he realizes that that was a useless move on his part. So good for me that he wasted a move. And I move up there. I'm going to keep moving up try to keep my pawn chain moving, my 2 pawns marching forward. He does this. This is where he wanted to go. I do that, trying to lend support to the pawns. He comes down like that. That's going to force my king to move, but he's not going to be able to do anything else. So I have to move. Then he moved down his bishop. I'm not quite sure why he did that. Making room for one of his pawns. I'm not sure why he did that. Then I go up 1. Keep marching forward with the pawns. He moves the king in, realizing that he's going to need to bring some forces to stop my pawns. Keep marching forward with the pawns. He goes up like that, and I do that. Now, that was a defensive move, because now his rook could take my 1 pawn, but if he does that, my other pawn is going to take his bishop. And I guess he does, and pawn for bishop is not a good trade, so he doesn't want to do that. So he moves his bishop out of risk. But that gives me time to do that. So now that pawn that his rook could have taken is now protected. Now he notices that pawn is now open to take, you see? Because this pawn I'm backing up. This pawn had been protected by a bishop for many, many turns. So he was observant to notice that by moving my rook, that pawn was no longer protected, and he goes in for the kill. Now, of course, what he's really doing is forcing a trade of pieces, because I'm going to have to capture his bishop with my horse. Actually, I don't have to do that, but I do. And then he's going to capture back. So that simplified the game a little bit. I'm down to exactly 1 piece, my rook, 1 piece and 5 pawns. He's got 2 pieces and 4 pawns. So he should still have a very clear advantage here. And every time we trade pieces, his advantage grows, because I'm the one who's down. I move again. That was a good move, you see, because it checks his king. So there's nothing he can do with his bishop or his rook. He's got to move his king. And he moves his king there. And then I can check him again. But here's where he does a good move. He does that. Now that basically... my 2 pawns are basically stuck now. Because if the pawn on the left goes up and promotes, his king can capture it. And there's nothing I can do to stop that. And meanwhile, the pawn on the right is trapped underneath his king. And even though my rook is keeping that pawn alive, I can't force his king to move. So basically his king is blocking one pawn with his body, and he's blocking the other pawn by threat of capture. So there's nothing I can do with either of those pawns at the moment. So I decide what I'm going to have to do is, I think I decide here that I'm going to have to start moving my king. Right. Start trying to get my king up there to do something, to mess around with the situation. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet, but that's the idea. He does that, checking the king, but it's no problem because I can just move out of the way. Now he could shoot right up and capture a pawn now, but if he did that, I would be able to capture him back. So he's not really that threatening at this point. He goes up 1 square. I don't really know why he did that. Maybe he had a logical reason. I move over like that. Oh, I see why he did that, because now he can capture that pawn underneath. He can capture the pawn that's underneath the king. So I do that. Now, protected again. And at this point in the game, I don't really have like a end game that in sight. I'm really just trying to like survive turn by turn and just not let him do anything. It's entirely defensive at this point with me. Now here's where he makes a key decision. He decides to trade the rooks away. I think this was probably a mistake on his part, because without a rook, if you only have a bishop, he must have been planning on promoting a pawn, because a bishop is not an easy piece to get a checkmate. So to get rid of his rook, he's getting rid of one of his main tools to get a checkmate. But he decides to trade rooks at this point. He decides to simplify down. So he does that. I take his rook. He takes my rook. So now we're down to this. He should still be thought to have even more of an advantage, even though I think probably maybe not. Numbers-wise, he's supposed to have an even greater advantage now. And with using his bishop, he should have, I guess, a better opportunity to promote a pawn than I do. But his best pawn, his one passed pawn, he leaves his one passed pawn vulnerable. So I'm going to go take it now. And I don't think he's able to stop me. So he probably wasn't thinking. That was another mistake of his. It's sad that he seemed to make so many mistakes and yet I had such a hard time against this guy. I guess I don't know what that means. He goes up there. I go there. So now he no longer has a pass pawn. Here's where he makes another mistake. He comes down there. Now he's not doomed yet, but well, let's just go for it. So he does that. I capture back. And then the move that sealed his fate for the game was this next move where he uses his bishop and captures back the pawn. After that point, his defeat was inevitable. And I know that because I practiced, I ran it, I used the tools, chess.com tools, to run through the scenario like 100 times to make sure that there's absolutely nothing he could do, and there was nothing he could do once he decided to take this pawn. So the reason why he's doomed now is because with my king and 2 pawns, I can force a promoted pawn in the top left corner, and his bishop, because of that move he made, his bishop will not be able to get up there and stop it. There's one way that his bishop can get up there and stop it, but it would require him to sacrifice the bishop. So here's what goes down at this point. So now it occurs to me that what I need to do is to move the one pawn that can promote, go ahead and promote it to queen. He's going to capture it right away, so I'm not going to have a queen. But here's the genius. Now, if I do this, the other pawn's path to promotion is protected, and his king can't do anything about it. His king can't capture. His king can't block. His king actually can't even move. His king is just stuck right there, and there's nothing he can do. And the bishop can't come to the rescue, and maybe you can see why, because if the bishop tries to line up to attack my king or to attack that pawn, he's going to get captured by my last remaining pawn chain. So even my last remaining pawn chain played a role in winning this game. There's only one move that he can do now, and he's smart. He plays that move, and that's to sacrifice his own bishop in order to stop me from promoting the pawn. That's what he does. So I capture. So I can't actually promote. I'm not actually going to promote the pawn now because his king is going to get to it first. But at this point, I sit and I do a bunch of math, and I realize that I do math, not in my head, but using the tools of chess.com. I realize that my pawn that's on the F file, I guess they call it that I can promote that pawn. And the way I do it is I will use my king. First, I'll use my king to capture his pawn on the F file. And then I'll link up my king to that pawn so that they're touching each other. And that will provide total protection against his king. And I'll be able to basically escort that pawn all the way up. So we'll see how this goes. He goes there, I go there. He captures, I capture. He goes there, I go there. And that might actually be the last move of the game. Let me see. Yeah, that was actually the last move of the game because he realized what I realized, which was that I was going to be able to get my pawn within one square of my king, basically right next to my king, before he could get his king to my pawn. So it's like a race for that to see who can get to that white pawn first. I was going to win that race by exactly one move. And then once the king is right next to the pawn, once they're touching adjacent in any direction, then that pawn is completely protected from the king. Meanwhile, he has only one pawn left, but that pawn's not going to be able to make it to the end because he's blocked by my pawn on the G file. So that was it. That was my come from behind win. And he resigned at this point, and I won. And I would have to say that the crucial move that sealed his fate was when he used the bishop to capture that pawn. If he had not done that, he could have used that bishop in different ways to thwart anything that I could have done in the top left corner. And I'm not sure what would have happened, but I probably wouldn't have won. So, moral of the story is that even if you're down, just make any move you can, do anything you can, try to stop him any way you can, and just see what happens, because maybe he'll make a lot of mistakes like this guy did. This guy immediately challenged me to a rematch, which I declined. I always do that, nothing personal to him. But I could tell he felt burned, and he was mad. That's okay. All right, end of this chess story.